Okay, let's talk about The Wall. The Wall is a multimedia project created by English rock band Pink Floyd, consisting of a 1979 studio album, a live performance touring over 1980 and 81, a 1982 experimental film, a 2010 through 2013 revival tour, a 2015 concert film, and a 2016 opera. The plot of all the various adaptations center around a rock star named Pink who struggles with depression and substance abuse. In the midst of an emotional spiral, Pink reflects on / hallucinates the events of his life that have led to that point, including vivid fabrication of the death of his father in World War II, hazy memories of the Blitz, his relationship with his mother, creative dissatisfaction, a decaying marriage, and a job in the music industry where he is treated as a commodity to be used, all of which form the metaphorical bricks in the emotional wall that Pink uses to separate himself from the world. I want to focus in mostly on the 1982 film because it is, I think, the adaptation that is able to do the most with the concept. The film was written by Pink Floyd frontman Roger Waters, directed by Alan Parker, with animation by Gerald Scarfe, and it is, well, it's a pretty heavy film. It can be a hard watch. It comes from a very dark place emotionally speaking. There is a lot of disturbing imagery. It's a very angry film.
When we grew up and went to school, there were certain teachers who would hurt the children any way they could.
It's pretty abstract in its presentation, relying heavily on associative imagery rather than conventional narrative, and this is both a strength and a weakness of the film. Abstraction is counterintuitively very efficient. It allows a movie to be about a lot of things simultaneously by letting symbols bleed into one another. The movie pinballs between war, classism, police brutality, the criminalization of youth culture, Thatcherism, generational trauma, commodification of art, and the homegrown fascism of the nations that bragged about beating the Nazis, and it's able to do this pretty fluidly. The film's underlying anger is, true to form, often incoherent, struggling to vocalize and manifest the exact shape of the subject, falling back on abstract imagery in order to suggest an emotional truth where literalism is insufficient. This allows the film to create really powerful moments. A running motif is anti-war, expressed as a seething rage of betrayal, abandonment, and exploitation at the hands of the system. Roger Waters' father was a conscientious objector during World War II, a pacifist who drove ambulance during the Blitz. In 1943, however, he changed his mind and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Territorial Army in September of that year. He was dead 5 months later. In Goodbye Blue Skies, the Union Jack shatters into pieces. For all its bravado and bluster, English nationalism is just blood in the gutter. Soldiers sent to war don't die for their country, they just die. The boys beat the Germans and came home just in time to build atom bombs. Symbols shift and merge and break apart, juxtaposed and contrasted in order to create an impression of their interconnected relationship in a way that is difficult to do using mere words, and core to the theme of the piece as a whole, no one specific thing is the load-bearing cause. There is no singular source of the sickness in society that isolates us from one another, that suppresses us, that brutalizes us, that exploits us. They are all just bricks in the wall. This abstraction, though, can also work against the film. A lot of the film's imagery, almost 40 years later, has an almost juvenile, makes-you-think shallowness to it, worn down by a generation of trite commentary on the relationship between art and commerce, in no small part directly influenced by The Wall, that, cheapens The Wall simply by association. The lack of a concise resolution, the lack of a clear point at the end, which functions for some viewers as a powerfully disquieting denial of closure, also leaves the door open for symbols to take on meanings counter to their intended or desired use. A centerpiece moment in the film comes when Pink, suffering from an overdose, is revived by his manager and record industry flunkies in order to be dressed and pushed out on stage. In this state, Pink conceptualizes himself in an alter ego, a fascist dictator indoctrinating teens primed by a conformist education system into hate and violence. This sequence, spanning the songs In the Flesh, Run Like Hell, and Waiting for the Worms, includes dramatization of hate crimes and sexual assault. The film's imagery of crossed hammers, invented for the movie as a deliberately unsettling expression of contemporary fascism and its ability to utilize the banal, the blunt, the simplistic, was adopted in 1988 by actual neo-Nazi group the Hammerskins, a now fractured organization whose dispersed members remain active in other hate organizations to this day. The potent imagery, structured as a condemnation, was still adopted by people who saw the violence not as horrifying, but as aspirational. The character of Pink holds fears and resentments towards women that are emotionally challenging to watch expressed on screen, and while a mature audience can certainly parse the difference between a character's excuses and reality, the film's lack of closure means there's little guidance on what the audience is ultimately meant to take away from the depictions of Pink being devoured by a predatory vaginal flower. And part of that is rooted in the film's emotional rawness, the dark place of the psyche where thoughts and fears and beliefs are not rational but are deeply potent and extremely present. Pink intellectually understands that his own self-destruction and alienation drove his wife away, but emotionally still conceptualizes her as a consuming predator. It doesn't all make sense or resolve or coalesce because we don't all make sense. Everyone is the illusion of order, constructed brick by brick out of chaos. So while The Wall is far from flawless, and certainly not for everyone, there are still, I feel, deep emotional truths in there. A human story about the contradiction of being, the self-amplifying spiral of isolation, and the fragility and hypocrisy of power. The album is good, but it was always written with a visual component in mind, be it the concert or the film, and I think the album definitely feels less than whole as a result. The movie also adds When the Tigers Broke Free, which is a song that I think adds a lot of welcome depth to the story. It's a really potent encapsulation of how Waters feels about the system that killed his father.
And that's how the high command took my daddy from me.
And this is a movie that Doug Walker, a man whose bread and butter is getting irrationally angry at movies for 9-year-olds, decided to riff in the form of a parody recreation.
Good old Pink Floyd made a movie devoid of even the slightest bit of subtlety.
Okay, so what is this? Why does this exist? I'm going to have to say a bunch of unkind things, and there's really no way around that, because the observable facts are just prima facie unkind.
Wait, maybe it's the other way around. I don't know. I got a high school education.
This is pandering like hell.
Basically, it's impossible to engage with something like The Wall, even sarcastically or disingenuously, without leaving a lot of yourself on the table as a result. What you fixate on, what you think is silly, why you think it's silly, these are all revealing. And that's not to say that you need to love The Wall or even like The Wall or, you're a phony or a poser or shallow if you don't. It's just that defending that position is going to demand emotional honesty. For most critics, that's not a problem, but we'll see. This review has become somewhat notorious online because there is something deeply compelling about it.
The art house ego trip had fallen and slipped to the bargain bin for $3.93.
There is a tremendous amount of effort on display, but it's also really lazy, if that makes any sense. The priority really seems to be in doing a lot, doing everything, rather than doing any of it particularly well. And this is what's confusing. There's so much going on, so many collaborations, so many moving parts, that it clearly took time and energy and passion. An energy and passion that needs to be maintained on some level for the weeks and weeks that it takes to put all this together, but there's no evidence whatsoever of what was actually driving that. You don't just make something like this on accident in an afternoon. This would have taken weeks, if not months, to coordinate. The collaborations with Satellite City and Rob Scallon needed to be arranged. Corey Taylor and his son needed to come out to Chicago. The final version of the trial probably took 80 hours just to render, not even including blocking and animating. Then there's writing, recording, props, costumes, all of which you can cut a lot of corners on, and make no mistake, the corners here are extremely cut. But there's a floor. Certain things are still going to take all week, no matter how half you ask them. So on some level, you have to care. You have to care a lot to commit to this amount of work. And that passion, it can come from just really loving the wall, or just really hating the wall, or feeling like you have a lot of stuff to say about it. But it's got to come from somewhere. In the middle, Doug does an ad for the companion album that they were selling for money that Doug describes as a love letter to Pink Floyd and their music, and it's just...
This is just such a love letter to Pink Floyd's music and The Wall, and you can download the album in the link below.
So hollow as a pitch, because the product, the thing that we're watching and listening to,
The Art House Ego Trip,
is extremely clearly not a love letter to Pink Floyd, and is dominated by someone who, based on the words being said, doesn't know much about Pink Floyd at all in the first place, and really doesn't like what they do know.
It's us versus them. I don't even know who us or them are. I just want to be angry so I can be.
Doug doesn't seem to understand The Wall on even a surface level, and really just doesn't appear to care much about The Wall one way or another, sort of. There is at no point any sense that Doug has a personal relationship to the material. Based off the depth of Doug's commentary, it reads very much like the opinion of someone who watched The Wall for the first time after already committing to do a full recreation, and then didn't particularly enjoy it, and wasn't really able to digest it because the whole viewing went through the filter of looking for ideas for the recreation. The commentary is extremely shallow while also being deeply petty and mean, but then also the longer you go into the review, the further it drifts from being about The Wall, and the more it becomes a showcase for Doug's own unrelated opinions. There's no clear sense of what viewpoints the various characters are supposed to represent. The critic is used to voice multiple different stances, being both critic, audience surrogate, creator surrogate, narrator, and protagonist, but then all of those are caked in various layers of sarcasm that make it really difficult to parse what the message is actually supposed to be. The whole of it is just very unclear. The commentary, when it's not completely off topic, waffles between faint praise like, well, I guess the song is kinda rad, and really performatively cruel stuff, like calling the creators clout-chasing fakes. None of it feels like the kind of good-natured ribbing you'd get from actually invested fans who are making fun of a thing that they love. What's missing at the core is any sense of motivation.
But that's it? We're stopping there?
Well, yeah, the movie did.
I didn't even get a line. Hell, I didn't even sing a song. What'd you even think of the movie?
Well, the movie ended on such an open vagueness that only makes sense that the review end on such an open vagueness.
You get to the end and have no idea why this was the form this product should take. Why make a straight reproduction of pretty much 50% of the entire film? Why make a complete companion album? Why put this much effort into a video about a subject that you just don't seem to have any substantive opinions on at all? And why put all this effort into this concept for this specific movie?
I liked it fine.
Yeah, me too.
A little full of itself, but good music and imagination.
Fair enough.
And having these questions afterwards is very bizarre when you're talking about a review, something that is, theoretically at least, predicated entirely on, talking about your opinions. And this is where we need to accept the reality that this isn't really a review. It's not a parody, it's not a commentary, and it's not a spoof. It's barely even about The Wall. It's honestly closer to fan fiction in a way. Doug wants to be a filmmaker. He wants to make art, but he can't. because he's a fundamentally incurious person who isn't much interested in what other people think or feel, and all his ideas boil down to, what if Batman met Mario?
Slapstick focuses on the most important rule of comedy, that all comedy, in one way or another, is based on misery. With little to no dialogue, quickly identifiable characters, and nothing but chases. People see it as classic because it's so minimal and yet so interesting. It says so much with just a few clever choices. Fury Road is the same way.
He is YouTube's own homegrown Tommy Wiseau or Neil Breen, complete with the same unwillingness to learn how a camera works.
Hey, so you invited me up here, what you want to do?
Just watch TV.
You invited me up here to literally watch TV?
I'm a successful musician with millions. How can you expect me to be happy?
It has that same heady mix of incompetence and ego that is absolutely intoxicating to talk about. So much of the actual content is predicated on readings of the material that are just wildly wrong, and yet so absolutely confident in their delivery. Doug decided to accuse an 80-minute movie of being too long and padded, and then didn't even flinch as he sandwiched that between a rant about people being mean to him on Twitter and an 8-minute argument with a busty nightmare squirrel. And it's that element, that deeply misplaced sense of confidence, that really just makes nostalgia critics of The Wall captivating. Like The Room, it's a deeply cynical product made by a fundamentally untalented man, bored by the idea of personal growth, building so many layers of self-protective irony that it becomes unintentionally revealing.
You mean like The Room?
No.
Yes.
Shut up.
Doug is utilizing The Wall as a showcase for his own ideas, his own lyricism, his own jokes, his own singing. The video is him strutting his stuff as a filmmaker. So while some of it is about The Wall, for the most part, the further you get into it, the more it shifts to just being about Doug. This is a bit of a struggle to describe, which is why I'm kind of repeating myself over and over, but it makes sense when you see it.
Waiting for the point.
A bunch of it is just disconnected Weird Al style parody songs about things that grind Doug's gears, and the parts that are about The Wall are, more often than not, so off base that you would believe the entire thing was created from decades old memories if it weren't for the granular details that are included. It's not Doug Walker's review of The Wall, it's just Doug Walker's version of The Wall. So let's talk about some specifics.
Is this like what you expected to see?
Doug's parody of Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 is an immediate standout to people as just one of the worst things they've put in their brains that they didn't find on Rotten.com.
We need more victimization.
There are no good teachers! Not one! Not even by accident!
Restyled as We Need More Victimization, the song is simultaneously a criticism calling The Wall whiny, engaging in bizarre whataboutism, and a thinly veiled rant about online culture war nonsense, a subject that will crop up a few times throughout the video. Most of the substance of this is contained in Doug's inexplicable Dracula impression.
Welcome to high school, where all the teachers are monsters. I know it looks like they want to teach you something, but they don't. They just want to eat you up because we're evil, blood-sucking vampire things.
Doug's argument here is that everyone thinks school sucks, that opinion isn't special or noteworthy or substantive, that The Wall is just dunking on school because it's a popular opinion with teenagers, and the bizarre whataboutism of pointing out funding issues with the American public education system while throwing in some stale jabs about school teaching algebra instead of car maintenance.
Do you know what we teach in these walls?
How to fix a car, pay your taxes, ace an interview, perform first aid, manage your insurance, cook healthy meals, or do household repairs?
Preposterous! We pay other people to do those things. We teach important things you need to know in life, like algebra.
No, our education system's broke.
Wait, maybe it's the other way around. I don't know. I got a high school education.
This is pandering like hell. LOL, so school sucks. Grow a damn pair of balls.
Now, at the surface level here, it just needs to be said, Doug is transparently imposing his own experience of school in 1980s, 1990s suburban Illinois on Waters' experiences in primary school in the 1950s and 60s in England. So just at a very fundamental level, this doesn't work because it's a complete non sequitur. It's a response to another brick in the wall that's so off topic that misses the mark by such a wide mile that it's clear he just wasn't paying attention. More than that, though, what interests me here is the way that this version is an argument in support of the status quo. Like, let's talk about the grim cowardice of school helps you get a job.
It's all a part of a secret plan to make sure you're more likely to get a job when you're older.
Like, okay, let me back up a bit and illustrate the problem here. The roots of public education are split between two major motivators, the first being philosophical and the second being industrial. The philosophical argument is that knowledge is inherently valuable and it is a moral good for society to educate everyone, that a society with a widespread familiarity with the physical sciences, mathematics, ethics, literature, and the arts is a more inventive society and a more ethical society. The industrial argument is that school should exist to prepare you to work. This is rooted in the real history of much of public education, as early efforts to expand public education were driven by industrialists whose growing empires needed more specialized laborers to do the work of middle management, which mostly means accounting. The idea, from their perspective, was you could convince the government to teach everyone the reading, writing, and arithmetic needed to do the job, which would make it easier to fill all the positions needed, lower training costs, and drive down the price of math and literacy-based labor. This second argument has had a lot of power and influence over the shape of education in the last 2 centuries, and is still alive and well today. There is a tremendous amount of ongoing debate in education circles about the balance between raw theory and the pragmatic modern reality of labor. There's tons of people who will argue that we should really have 2 school tracks so that students who just aren't that interested in math and Shakespeare, who think algebra is useless, can go watch Amazon training videos for a couple years and get right to work in the fulfillment warehouse. The criticism, which Waters is directly engaging with in Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, is that this arrangement, school as a pipeline to industry, means that what is taught in school and how it is taught will be dictated by industrialists, by corporations. The school system, then, becomes nothing but a systematic reshaping of children into ideal workers, obedient, compliant, and narrowly trained in only what is needed for the job. It is a reduction of people to exploitable labor, to uniform bricks in a wall. It is critical of the fundamental ordering of society. Why should these institutions, rampant with abuse and steered by corporate ghouls, be given so much power over us? Why, especially, should they be given so much power over children? This is all part of the multi-layered metaphor of the wall. There is the autobiographical element placed in the specifics of English primary school in the 1950s and 60s, and the way that those experiences shaped Waters into the adult he became, which then serves as a means to criticize the existence of the system itself, because the abuses he suffered, the physical violence of beating children who failed in the rote recitation of number tables, were systematized and took place within a system that was at best indifferent and at worst approving. This continues to resonate with people to this day because regardless of whether or not corporal punishment has been abolished and more idealistic pedagogies have prevailed, institutionalized school is still an institution and will never be an unalloyed good. It will always be vulnerable to corruption, to abuse, to manipulation, and the question of whose agenda is served by the structure and material must remain an eternal debate. So, yeah, I feel confident that Doug's argument here just isn't very well formed. It's unclear, shallow, and doesn't actually engage with the question. D-.
Wait, time out. Is this really a World War II reference?
No, it's just a bunch of kids being herded onto a train to a horrible, torturous building. Oh.
Yeah, we're really comparing this to high school?
Following We Need More Victimization is an extended skit where Doug, dressed as the critic, defends the wall from criticism.
No, it's just meant to look weird and creepy. They're not implying that.
The critic is positioned as the rube. His defenses are clearly meant to be hollow and weak. The problem is that the accusations he's sarcastically defending the movie against only hold weight based on Doug's own shallow misreading of everything else up to this point. In The Wall, Pink, as a child hiding in a train tunnel, sees school children as faceless blobs crowded into cattle cars and envisions himself too becoming faceless. This is the beginning of the happiest days of our lives, which is effectively just the intro to Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, during which the faceless children are fed into a meat grinder. So the more immediate imagery is a slaughterhouse. Is that, in part or by extension, also a Holocaust reference? Yeah, it is. It is a World War II reference, because much of the album and movie are about the after effects of that war. It's not an abstract concept that's just being name-dropped for aesthetic symmetry. It's a real event that people lived through, and The Wall is in no small part a reflection on growing up in the shadow of that and reflecting on the value of it, or more specifically, the lack thereof. The statement is that the inhumanity of the system, its goals and methods, are ultimately homoousian, of the same stuff as the inhumanity that leads a system to load humans into cattle cars. That comparison is only inappropriate if, 1, you think the message is simply school sucks, and 2, you've been ignoring the role of World War II within the film up to this point.
Oh, come on, they're just saying school sucks. They're not making any connections to that. Now let's go on to the next song that talks about the horrors of World War II. Oh, crap.
See.
It's just a coincidence, maybe. I don't know.
As those of you familiar with The Wall may have noticed, this is all out of order because the joke doesn't work if you do it in order. Doug's joke is a setup for his version of Goodbye Blue Sky, retooled as So Long Weird Song.
Doesn't this seem too heavy? Is World War II with monsters too silly?
Originally, this is all the other way around. Goodbye Blue Sky leads into the train tunnel, which segues into Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. The reason that matters is because originally, the imagery of Goodbye Blue Sky is the setup for later imagery. Gerald Scarfe's powerful visualization of the war, and specifically the Blitz, as a psychological force that scarred the collective psyche of the people as deeply as it scarred the land and the bodies of soldiers. I cannot stress this enough. Goodbye Blue Sky is one of the most potent pieces of filmmaking I've ever seen. It is ruinously effective at using its imagery to convey the sheer scale of damage and waste that the war represents. It's grim and haunting and very important as a foundation for what follows. In So Long Weird Song, Doug asks if World War II with monsters is too silly for a movie that also complains about how high school bites.
Doesn't this seem too heavy? Is World War II with monsters too silly? Oh, Roger Waters, did you ever wonder why these images of slaughter made it in a film that also sings about how high school bites?
Which, of course, again, is predicated on that actually being the message, which it isn't, and indulges in a deeply misplaced level of literalism by describing the sequence as World War II with monsters, as though this were a direct-to-video Pacific Rim sequel. Now, this kind of literalism is a pretty regular part of Doug's normal bit. It just really falls apart here. It's one thing when it's aimed at corporate franchise schlock aimed at kids, but it just really obviously misplaced and inappropriate when applied to a deeply earnest piece of art that is overtly symbolic, unapologetically symbolic in its attempt to communicate what this real event that really happened felt like to live through. He also calls the song Oscar bait, which is funny because it's both literally wrong, Goodbye Blue Sky wasn't eligible for an Oscar in the first place, and also because it's such a deep insult that it's really revealing.
So long, Oscar bait song. Smoke a bong and it will feel less wrong.
Now, I don't actually think Doug was literally calling the song Oscar bait. I don't think he thinks that they were specifically playing towards the Academy, but I do think that he thinks The Wall is spiritually Oscar bait, which is to say insincere. The capstone here, for me, is the replacement animation, which is, first of all, just visually awful and cheap in a way that would be considered subpar for 2007, and second, is just so petty and mean that this is what makes it very funny when Doug calls his album a love letter to Pink Floyd. The Imperial Eagle is labeled ego, and the Frightened ones are labeled self-content? I honestly can't tell if that's supposed to be content or content because neither really makes sense. I think he's saying ego is the destroyer of self-content, like Roger Waters' dissatisfaction is not the result of any real problems, but is a product of his own ego? That would parse because the lyrics of the song do directly address Roger Waters, and later a cloud labeled My Problems grows flowers of pity, and then blasts another cloud labeled Other People's Problems. I don't know, I think it's one thing to describe The Wall as whiny or juvenile, to say in effect that it encapsulates a really teenage mindset, but it's quite another to accuse the creators of being disingenuous, ego-tripping fakes who milk imaginary problems for pity. I don't think you can make that accusation and then turn around and insist that you liked it fine and made a love letter to its creative vision. That's the kind of thing that you say about something you just really don't think very highly of at all.
That's why I watch, despite it being so whiny. You see, pandering like hell.
So long, Oscar bait song.
You're not Oscar bound.
This is just such a love letter to Pink Floyd's music and The Wall.
The song Comfortably Numb, retooled as Comfortably Dumb, is where things start to really wander off topic. It's not really about The Wall, but it's kind of about Doug's relationship to The Wall and to media in general, and it's probably the most honest song Doug put into the project, almost certainly not on purpose. Nominally, it's about the pacing of the film, and Doug reiterates once again that he thinks Roger Waters' opinions are the illegitimate whining of a millionaire, but it's also Doug saying he doesn't understand and he doesn't care to. The movie is challenging and he just doesn't have any interest in engaging with it on its own terms. He has become comfortably dumb.
I just don't understand. Is this now how I am? I have become comfortably dumb.
And you know what? I'm not going to disagree. You said it, man. I don't know if it works as self-deprecating humor because I don't think it's comedically true. I think it's just true. Going into the ad break, there's a changeover. So, okay, up to this point, Corey Taylor, the frontman for nu metal band Slipknot, has been playing the equivalent role of Pink. As they transition, Corey is replaced with Doug, so Doug plays Pink for the equivalence of In the Flesh and Waiting for the Worms. This is part of a running gag, being that the actual rock musician doesn't get to sing a song until the very end, at which point he plays the SpongeBob SquarePants theme, and also probably just a logistical extension of only getting Corey out for a day or two and block shooting all of his stuff. The other thing that's going on, which is far more trivial but bothers me so much, is that the exterior shot is overwhelmingly blue, and I'm not sure if this is a stylistic choice or a mistake, that they just forgot to set the white balance properly and just left it. Because Doug does that just all the time. After the ad break, which consists of an uncomfortably overacted ad for online data harvesting scam Honey and Doug's own tie-in recreation of the entire album The Wall, which, again, they were selling for money, we get this. truly every frame is a painting.
And I'm that nameless foe.
No, okay. Where do I start with this?
I got some weird news for you, sunshine. This was dissing Thatcher's administration. But it's vague enough to put anyone you fear. Politician, showman, just put their face here.
No, Doug. No, it really wasn't.
Are there any queers in the audience tonight?
It really wasn't that vague.
No one looks Jewish. And no one's a coon.
Not vague at all.
Get him up against the wall. Yes. No.
Not even a teeny tiny bit vague.
That one's looking stressed. He wants to feel impressed. Put him in the wall.
Okay, so this whole segment is just Doug venting about people being mean to him on Twitter. It is completely disconnected from The Wall, not even a tiny bit about the movie. It's just Doug using the veil of alter ego to express an otherwise authentically held belief. And that's honestly a charitable reading of it, because otherwise you're saying that a criticism of Thatcherism, the policies of austerity, of rigid enforcement of Christian norms, the violent suppression of political dissent, of a rising homegrown fascist movement, criticisms that predate the AIDS crisis but would hold true well into the 80s as governments decided it was unofficial policy that AIDS was a divine punishment and a solution to their gay crisis. You're saying that all that isn't substantively different from people yelling at each other on the internet over Batman movies.
That one looks like he really wants to be outraged. Now with social media, you have the stage.
So yeah, I think the most charitable reading here is that Doug's just talking about himself. Alright, there's only one major section left, and this is maybe where I risk a controversial opinion. Common among reactions to this video is to say that while the review as a whole is really bad, the animation at the end is really good. It's the best part, and anyone who is criticizing the review should, be kind to Fenna, the animator who put it all together, because it was a lot of work. So, what happens is Corey enters the Channel Awesome office and is about to confront Doug when Doug is interrupted by a phone call.
Or is it just a misguided ego trip in this self-indulgent world that we all live in? Pardon, who is it?
Hello there, critic.
It's Sullivan Croft.
Is that all city guy?
Yes, actually. Is Lucy Lacemaker there? Is she there? Because I was, it's just a thing of, shut the fuck up.
Now, I've done all the research to piece all this together so that I can summarize it, but on first viewing, I had zero clue what was going on. I don't know who this is, but it's clearly a reference that the video expects me to get. There's clearly some sort of backstory to these characters. It's not just an abstraction, and just to really add to the confusion, the whole thing is this mumblecore overlapping ramble, and it looks like garbage, and you can't understand what they're talking about because you can't understand what they're even saying.
Not exactly giving creation all of its credit. It's not like you just shit out the Horcrux that Voldemort never meant to make.
And then this thing shows up, and the barely intelligible dialogue just keeps going until the whole thing segues into the trial, where it honestly doesn't get much easier to understand. Now, before we get into this any further, yes, there's a lot of technical competency on display. Modeling is hard, texturing is hard, rigging is hard, animation is hard, hair simulations are hard. All of this represents hours and hours and hours and hours of work. There is a lot of effort on display here. Okay, So Fenna is a YouTube animator who makes a series called Satellite City, which is, I guess, a skit show with a combination of live action and CG animation, and way too much lore for a series with an average episode runtime of 130 seconds. So the characters in the trial are all characters from Satellite City, and it's just not good. Kind of the real change of pace is that it's not good in ways that are new to the review so far. From what I can glean, this segment was made by Fenna more or less in isolation from the rest of the video. The track on the album is called Fenna's The Trial. The credits say it's produced by Fenna, and so it does seem like Fenna wrote and produced all of it using his normal stable of voice actors. Which makes sense because the opinions are bad, but they're a different kind of bad. The entire song is sung in universe from the viewpoint of these characters who feel that the wall falls short because all the animated monsters in the movie don't get enough screen time or development. And then another character comes in and says that, I guess we can give it a pass because it wasn't trying to tell a story.
This film's not bound by characters, it's a visual affair. It never aimed to tell a story, rather a sprawling canvas of emotion, visual splendor.
Okay, so this sucks. That's just a really weak, disingenuous argument being filtered through a character in order to scrub it of any meaning or ownership, because heaven forbid you put an actual opinion out into the world. It's also just wrong at a very basic level. The wall is telling a story. It's not conventionally told, and it's a little loose, but it's very comprehensible. The animated monsters at the end of the movie aren't underdeveloped in the slightest because they're extensions and representations of the characters that were already present in the rest of the movie. They are psychosexual visualizations of those literal characters and the ideas those characters represent. Parents, the state, the education system, intimate partners. The problem with using Fenna's horny edgelord steampunk furry OCs is that they actually are underdeveloped. If there's even an attempt at using them in a metaphorical fashion, then that's lost in the clear specificity of the crossover. They're not present in any meaningful capacity through the rest of the review. They don't represent anything substantive, and they are, for the most part, awful, overbaked designs for one-note characters.
Fills me with an urge to decapitate!
So you're going to have this over-designed horny rat thing lecture about how the wall is all style over substance, devoid of intellectual development, then alien big titty goth girlfriend calls the movie lazy.
And when I heard you were reviewing the much-to-be-desired wall, I figured I'd throw my own tuppence. Style over substance, showcasing a bunch of weird creatures and worlds, not a drop of intellectual development.
Constantly as it's being lazy.
Cringe. There's no other word for it. This makes me cringe. It's embarrassing. On a deep level, the entire structure of this just doesn't work. It's poor criticism, and it's not even an appropriate parallel to the segment that it's a recreation of. If this were actually a coherent work, then this isn't where you would put the movie on trial. This is where you would put Doug on trial. This is where you would take all the other ideas from the rest of the review, consolidate them in one place, interrogate them, and interrogate what they say about their author. So no, I don't think this is the good part of the review because it's still a tremendous amount of effort put into modeling, texturing, and rigging a fundamentally bad concept. Just at the basics, it's confusing and muddled. Creatively, it seems to have started from the ending, the chant of tear down the wall, taken from the original and recontextualized to mean tear down the wall, the movie, and working backwards from that is just a bunch of stuff that's just hammered into place, because if you're doing a full recreation, then you've got to put something in there. You've got a lyric sheet to fill out and time to kill. And of course, afterwards, the whole review ends with a lazy lampshade of the fact that the review didn't actually contain anything of substance.
Okay! I liked it fine.
Yeah, me too.
A little full of itself, but good music and imagination.
Fair enough.
And the resolution of the gag that Corey Taylor hasn't done anything yet in the form of the SpongeBob SquarePants theme song.
SpongeBob SquarePants!
kind of the buck wild thing here is that if there were less effort put into this, if the substance was otherwise exactly the same, but there wasn't a companion album on sale for money, there wasn't an entire end-to-end abridged recreation, if there were just 1 or 2 songs and a bunch of lazy jokes about the movie being really pretentious, then I don't think this would compel people in the way it does. There is an effort on display that is its own form of earnestness, and it's just all falls flat because it's just no good. It's trying to be impressive without being vulnerable, and simultaneous to that, it's pissing on a really earnest piece of art specifically for being vulnerable. And to see all this played out against the backdrop of a movie from a band that is decades and decades and decades old, well outside Doug's normal wheelhouse, with no clear indication of why this particular movie, this album, is something that Doug feels is worth this much effort, it's a baffling product. But wait! Holy crap, it's long-running character Hat Dan, the Dan with a hat! But what did you really think about it? I guess I liked it fine. A little full of itself, but they put in a lot of effort. Yeah!